Just before I get started in the message, we're in Revelation chapter 12 this morning, and it's filled with every kind of apocalyptic image you can possibly imagine and more. But before we get to that, a couple things. One is, if you didn't know, October is actually Pastor Appreciation Month. No. No. The reason I bring it up is not because I'm trying to serve myself in some way. The reason I bring it up is because how many have noticed we have an amazing pastoral team around here, yeah? Just a great job they do. And so two things. One is, if you are leaving today and you go by the Welcome Center and ask for a note card, if you want us, just jot down a note. Maybe someone has done something or said something that was encouraging to you. You sharing that with them is an encouragement to them. You can jot down the note, leave it at the Welcome Center. They'll make sure people on pastoral staff get that. The second thing is we're kind of collecting an offering throughout the course of the month that we'll distribute among the pastoral staff. I exempt myself from that. I want them to have that. We'll split that up among them. But if you'd like to participate, no obligation at all. If you'd like to participate, there's a, what do they call it, a QR code? There it is. You can do that. Secondly is, I'm going to do something I never do. And I'm a little bit anxious about it, to be honest. And that is that my own devotional life is not something that I distribute. And the reason I don't do that is because the minute I start thinking that I'm going to distribute something, it changes the way I think and it changes the way I write. And so it's just easier for me to keep that personal and separate. It allows me more latitude. And but quite a few months ago, I was going through Revelation devotionally, and I found in every chapter consolation. And so in my devotional that for those days, I wrote down the consolations of Revelation. And just so you know, like in my actual journal for this, the spelling isn't great, the grammar isn't great, the punctuation isn't great. But I'm just capturing thoughts and ideas that I think God's Spirit is using to encourage me. And what I did was we cleaned those up because in their original form, probably not very helpful. But we cleaned those up. And if you're interested, there's actually a way you can access the Consolations of Revelation. There's a QR code for that as well. It's also available on our website. And every day there's a chapter for 22 days where it's just some of my devotional thoughts about how God is consoling us in the face of the things that we are facing, the challenges that we're dealing with. All right. In case you're wondering, I do have my timer going, but it did not do me any good in the last service, so you can start praying now. What if the struggles that you are facing on a daily basis, the self-doubt that you wrestle with, the opposition that you contend with, the concept that life seems to be harder than it should be or needs to be. What if that were actually part of something larger, part of a story that you've been written into? I think that's the underlying message of Revelation chapter 12. And what it does is it reframes some of our life. A lot of us have a very binary sense of life. And if things are hard, we must be getting it wrong. And if things are good, we must be getting it right. And I can assure you, there are things, people who are getting it wrong and their life seems pretty good. And there are people who are doing things really well and they're paying an unbelievable price for it. And so Revelation 12 kind of reframes our thinking on this. So beginning in verse 1, it says, "Then I witnessed in heaven an event." Other translations use the word sign here. I'll come back to why that's important. An event of great significance. I saw a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon beneath her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant, and she cried out because of her labor pains and the agony of giving birth. And I know some of you are wondering, what was John smoking that he saw all of this? And so this is what I want us to think about, is that the images that we are seeing are actually not superstitious, uninformed, unintelligent ways to distract us from reality. That they're filters through by which we actually are able to see reality better. But it requires a kind of imagery, and for a lot of human history, imagery has been a part of our learning. Right? We learned metaphorically. In the modern culture, it's less so. But John uses these very powerful images, and the first point that I think he's making is glory and struggle. Glory and struggle can coexist. Glory and struggle can coexist. And what he says is that they saw this event, this sign. And this word sign is really interesting. It means that it is something, it's a visual of something else. So for example, how many here have ever been driving and you saw a sign and it said, welcome to the town of, and then the town's name. You've ever seen that? You're crossing a threshold into that town. Now, when I was doing the Camino in Spain, they actually don't have a sign that says, you are now leaving the town of whatever the name is. They just have the name of the town with a big red circle and a slash through it. You're out of town now. That's kind of how that is. That's how they do it there. So it has to do with the idea of a threshold. It also has an idea to do with a sign in battle so that everybody who is engaged in whatever the effort is against the enemy, that they know what their responsibility is and they're moving forward. So it's this dual concept of there's a threshold that's being crossed and there's action that's being taken. So this is how John wants us to think about this. When you see these things, assume there are thresholds that are being crossed and there's action that's being taken, right? And so what we get, the first image is just, it's hard to talk about, but it is a woman clothed in glory screaming in labor. And so what are we supposed to do with that? And the woman actually represents something. It would have been far more obvious to the original readers than it is to us because we aren't raised in their culture and their history, but the real clue came with the 12 stars that were in the crown that she was wearing. And those represent the 12 tribes of Israel. So what it's basically saying is this woman represents God's people, clothed in glory and suffering. Clothed in glory and suffering. That what's happening is, in attempting to bring something meaningful, in the case of Israel, gave birth to the Messiah, and that came through Mary, that in the effort of that there was suffering that was involved. So it's calling and struggling. And once again, I said, we live in a very binary world. Our assumption is if life is hard for me, then I must be not operating in my calling. And if life is good for me, I must be operating in my calling. And we will not be able to make a lot of sense of life. So John wants us to make sense of this right away. Just because you're struggling might not be because you've done something wrong. It might be that you're doing something important. It's a really interesting way to reframe our thinking. And so the labor pains don't contradict the glory. They confirm she's doing something that matters. Now, let's continue on in verse 3 and 4. Then I witnessed in heaven another significant event, another sign. I saw a large red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, with 7 crowns on his heads. His tail swept away 1/3 of the stars in the sky, and he threw them to the earth. He stood in front of the woman as she was about to give birth, ready to devour her baby as soon as it was born. I know, you're wondering, what does this mean? And I hope I can help make sense of it for you. The dragon comes in. Once again, this is not a picture of superstition. This is a sophisticated image to help us understand something. I'm sure it's happened to you. Have you ever noticed? Well, we have an expression for this. Have you heard it? When it rains, what does that mean? Lots of things are happening all at once, right? It's not just a little trickle, like it's a deluge. Have you ever noticed that when you're trying to move forward in some area of your life, that you seem to be attacked at multiple areas? And don't get me wrong, personally, I think a single-headed dragon would be more than enough. I don't want to face that. But this dragon's got 7 heads, which means what? It means that even if you're fighting this head, it's got other heads that can attack you from different ways. You can't get away from this thing. Even if you're able to hold your ground here, it feels like you're being attacked there. And this is so how are we supposed to think about this? So multiple heads, multiple horns. Certainly you've experienced this. Maybe you felt some pressure socially to comply with things that violated your values. At the same time, you're struggling with some internal doubt. At the same time, you're emotionally drained. At the same time, you don't have intellectual answers for some of the things that you're holding on to, and you're getting it all at once. And what John wants us to see is that's not just a coincidence, and that's not just an accident, that there is a power behind the power. That the multi-pronged attack has a source, and that source has an intention regarding you. Let's continue on. She gave birth to a son who was to rule all nations with an iron rod, and her child was snatched away from the dragon and caught up to God and to his throne. More stark imagery. But this is actually the gospel in a single sentence. Now, it seems so fast when they say it here. And from heaven's perspective, time doesn't operate like we do. For us, the 33 years of Jesus' life would have felt like a long time. But from heaven's perspective, the baby, which is Bethlehem, about to be born, do you remember Herod was there and he wanted to kill the baby, right? And the baby is rescued, crucified, but taken to heaven, resurrected and taken to heaven. It's the birth, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension of Jesus all in a single sentence. That's a really cool thing. Here's the challenge. Is that a lot of us, when we look at, so Herod, if you don't know the story, Herod was an individual who, when he heard that the Jews thought a Messiah was going to be born, he wanted to know where. He found out from religious leaders that the prophecy said Bethlehem. He sent troops to Bethlehem and given this order. Look for any boys in the town, 2 years old and younger, and kill them. And so when we hear something like that, we cannot believe, what an atrocity. What a disaster. And in modern culture, our tendency is to look at something like that and just go, well, he's an insecure person, and he's afraid someone's going to lay claim to his throne. He doesn't want a threat from political power. He wants to take advantage of the situation before that child ever grows up and becomes anybody. Let's just get rid of him now. And so we tend to see the challenges that we face in life as only just the insecurities, the lack of education, the lack of support that people have, and that if we just had better environments, better education, better systems, better support, our world would be a better place. Okay, so right now you and I live in a country where it's about as good as history has ever been able to create it, and yet have you noticed we don't seem to be absent of evil raising its head? Because in a materialist world where it says, well, it's just about education, it's just about support, they have no explanation. A materialist has no explanation for why evil persists when a person gets both of those things. And then there are levels of evil that I don't know what you think about this, but when I see it, I go, how did a human being come up with that? How did they think to do that? Like, what is fractured in their head that even allows that as a possibility? Well, why would they think that was, why did they ever have the idea, much less act on it? And John is telling us, and I know eyes are going to roll when I say this, but John is telling us there's a power behind the power, that it's not just an insecure king who wants to hold on to his position, but there is someone who knows that if the Messiah comes and the Messiah reigns, it's going to be a problem. And so he instigates and he causes people to act in according to his will in order to try to eliminate the Messiah at his most vulnerable moment, which is his birth. And we see it later, like at the crucifixion, the trial of Jesus, right? We see Pilate there. He's unwilling to make a decision that was cause the life of Jesus to be rescued or saved in that moment because he feels political pressure. So what's happening? There's another force behind the force. There's another power behind the power. And it says this in verse 6. The woman fled into the wilderness where God had prepared a place to care for her for 1,260 days. This gives us another important insight, and that is God has hidden storerooms and classrooms. God has hidden storerooms and classrooms. She's going into the wilderness. Nobody wants to go to the wilderness. Very few people vacation in the wilderness. It is a harsh place. It's a barren place. It's a difficult place. But this passage tells us that even though the woman is fleeing and she has no sense of this, that God has already prepared a place for her there and provided resources for her and put a time limit on it, 1,260 days. The time is limited. In case you're feeling like you're in something of a wilderness these days, it's a harsh place and not a lot of fruit is being born and it's difficult. I would just ask you to think about it in terms of Revelation 12. What place has God prepared for? Like, you're here. God's put you in a church family. That's incredible. There's other things that he has prepared for you too, and that he has provided for you. It might not be all the provision that you want, but it is what you need for today. And this is the really good news, is there's a time limit on this. There's an expiration date. What you're going through and living through right now will not last forever. That's so important for us to hear. Because as soon as we think that this is going to be forever, we just lose our will. And God does amazing work in the wilderness. Then it says, then there was war in heaven. Michael is kind of an angel of considerable reputation. We see him multiple times in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon and his angels, and the dragon lost the battle. And he and his angels were forced out of heaven. Now it's going to tell us who the dragon is. The mask is coming off. This great dragon, the ancient serpent, called the devil, or Satan, the one deceiving the whole world, was thrown down to the earth with all of his angels. So this gives us some information that is hard for us to understand, but if you've been around church world or read very much of the Bible, you probably have run into this, and maybe it was even a question that you asked at the time. So in Job chapter 1, Job chapter 2, and Zechariah chapter 3, we see examples of Satan in the throne room of heaven making accusation against people on the earth. I think probably we're a little bit more familiar with the story of Job. If not, I was going to tell you it's a great read. It's a dramatic read. and the word is Job, not Job. And then in Zechariah chapter 3, there's a high priest, and he's about to go into the Holy of Holies to do ministry on behalf of the people. And we see a picture of Satan in the throne room making accusation against Joshua, who's the high priest there. And God actually has to rebuke Satan in that. Here's the picture. Satan has access to the throne room of heaven, and his role there, what he does nonstop, is he makes accusation against God's people in the world. And here's the most terrifying thing. He doesn't have to make anything up. There's all kinds of things we say and don't say, all kinds of things we do and don't do, all kinds of motives that we have. It's not a pretty picture. I don't even have to tell us we should live up to God's standard. We don't even live up to our own standard. We violate our own standards. And so we have this picture that Satan is just in heaven and he's making all these accusations, but it says after the ascension, resurrection and ascension of this one that Satan tried to destroy in his weakest moment to the throne of God, that there was a great war in heaven, and Satan and all of his angels were cast out and they went down to earth, which means simply this. Because of the resurrected and ascended Jesus, Satan lost his license to practice law in the throne room of God, and he can no longer stand there as a prosecuting attorney against us. Isn't that good? Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's way better than you think it is. There's no more voice accusing. And this is why this is so important. God does not say, you're not telling the truth. God is saying, the price has been paid for all of that penalty. And so you have no standing, no legal standing. It's like trying to re-accuse someone the price has already been paid for the sins that they committed. And listen, God is so just. He will not he will not require two prices for the same sin. Isn't that great? I love that. So, Satan is thrown down to the earth. Since he lost his standing before God, guess what he does? He comes and he whispers to us. Every failure, every time we fail to measure up, every time we mess up, he wants us to give up. Let's go on, verse 10. Then I heard a loud voice shouting across the heavens. It has come at last, salvation and power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters has been thrown down to earth, the one who accuses them before our God day and night. And they have defeated him by the blood of the Lamb and by their testimony, and they did not love their lives so much as they were afraid to die. The people who are on earth and now must contend, I love this picture. He, the enemy, the adversary of our souls, lost his standing in heaven, and we gained standing in heaven. Isn't that great? But now he's whispering to us all the things that we are not perfect on, and somehow we should be disqualified. And it says they overcame him. They overcame him. How did they do that? By the blood of the Lamb. This is a reoccurring image. The lamb that was slaughtered but standing, the blood that was shed that paid the price. We see this over and over in Revelation. And why is this so important? Because I don't overcome the enemy because what I have done or because I am so good or because I do things so well. I overcome the enemy because of what Jesus has done on my behalf. It is about performance, but not mine. It's what Jesus did for me. That's absolutely amazing, right? But also this. Now ask the worship team to come out. By our testimony. This is what I want to tell you. You have to find your voice and speak to yourself and others. I can tell you from my own experience in life, every time I notice some inconsistency, some insecurity, something about me, do you know what I tend to do? I tend to take a step back and I tend to quiet down. I disengage. I feel disqualified. And we can't overcome by losing our voice. We overcome by using our voice. What can we say? We can say that Christ died for us. We can say Christ loves broken people. Is there anybody else in the room glad he loves broken people? Yeah? Yeah. And Christ rose for me, and that is the source of my victory. So, what did Jesus do for us? That's the source of our victory. Finding our voice, speaking to ourselves, and then lastly, by not fearing death. And I've heard that there are people who are more afraid of public speaking than death, but I actually think if you gave them a choice, they would find something to say. It's just, I think that's true. Of course, we don't want to die, and a lot of us do worry about that. I think a lot of us also worry about those that we love so deeply dying. But can I tell you, there's a million mini deaths in our lives. And every time we're afraid that something in our life will die, we tend to take a step back and go quiet. For example, I've done a lot of pastoral counsel over the years. What I can tell you is that there are a lot of people who are involved in a sexual relationship, and they will tell me that it violates their values. They wish that they were not doing it. They feel some guilt about it, but they also are afraid. They are afraid that if I don't provide this for that person, they will leave me, and that will be the death of that relationship, a mini death. And so fear of a mini death will cause us to act in ways that violate our own values. Or maybe there's a situation going on in your home and you know that there would be a price to pay, or what people usually tell me, there would be hell to pay, and they won't give voice to it. They won't call attention to it. They won't address it because it could be the end of something that they value, and that little fear of that mini death keeps them from ever speaking up or into that situation. There's a million mini deaths, a million of them. And something happens when we take the worst case scenario that we can think of and we realize that it is not the end. That the cross was supposed to be the cataclysmic end of the Messiah, but in fact the resurrection proves that there's a whole lot life after that. And this is the thing about Satan. Jesus tells us in John chapter 10, he said, the thief comes to steal your life and to kill your life and to destroy your life. But Jesus has come that we might have life to the full. So we don't have to worry about the mini deaths or the ultimate death. We've been given life by Jesus, and as a result, we can own the space that we're in, and we can speak the words that need to be spoken, and we can watch what God does with them. And it yields the life that we so desperately crave and so desperately need. So yes, the dragon is real in the sense that there's multifaceted attacks that we face. And it's also true that there are times when we are experiencing suffering and we are experiencing pain and we are experiencing fear. All of that is true. So is the throne of God. So is the blood of the Lamb. And so is the one who is victorious in our life. And what I've come here to tell you today is you are going to make it. And it's not because we're so good. It's because he's so good. Amen? Amen? Let's all stand together this morning.